The needle went in clean. Silas Creel watched the nurse draw his blood with the same detached focus he used to navigate ice storms on Lake Superior. Standard procedure. Maritime insurance required a full health panel before his next deployment. 23 years captaining cargo ships, and this was just another box to check. Results in 3 days, the nurse said, pressing a cotton ball to his arm. You can pick them up, or we'll mail them. I'll pick them up. Silas drove home through Duluth's gray December streets, past the docks where his ship would be loading iron ore pellets next week. The city looked smaller every time he returned from the water, smaller and more foreign. Nadine's car wasn't in the driveway. She was pulling another double at St. Julian's Hospital. Their 14-year-old daughter, Maya, would be at basketball practice until 6. The house felt hollow, like it always did when he first came back from months at sea. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at mail that had piled up during his 9 months away. Bills, advertisements, a few Christmas cards from other ship families. Nothing that couldn't wait. 3 days later, Silas sat in Dr. Palmer's office holding his test results. The older physician cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Everything looks good overall, Captain Creel. Cholesterol's a bit high, but that's normal for your age and profession. However, there is one issue we need to address. Silas waited. You've tested positive for chlamydia. It's easily treatable with antibiotics, but we need to discuss contact tracing and I've been at sea for 9 months. I understand, but 9 months. No shore leave longer than 8 hours in Thunder Bay. No contact with anyone except my crew. Dr. Palmer shifted uncomfortably. Well, these things can sometimes remain dormant, or perhaps there was exposure before your departure. Silas took the prescription and left without another word. He sat in his truck in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes, engine running, heater blasting against the December cold. 9 months. He'd left in March and returned in November. The math was simple and ugly. That evening, Nadine came home exhausted from her shift, still wearing scrubs. She kissed his cheek absently and microwaved leftover lasagna. How is your physical? She asked, not looking up from her phone. Fine. Clean bill of health. She nodded, scrolling through something. Good. Maya's got a game Friday. Think you can make it before you ship out? I'll be there. Silas filled the antibiotic prescription the next morning and took the pills as directed. He didn't tell Nadine about the diagnosis. He didn't accuse her of anything. Instead, he did what he always did when facing dangerous waters. He gathered information. Over the next week, he observed. Nadine worked her usual 12-hour shifts at the trauma center, but her schedule seemed more erratic than he remembered. She took calls in the bathroom with the door closed. She showered immediately after coming home, even after day shifts when she shouldn't have been exposed to much. The house felt different, too. Furniture had been moved slightly. There was a wine glass in the sink that didn't match their set. The sheets on their bed smelled like unfamiliar cologne when he pressed his face to them while Nadine was at work. Silas had spent decades reading wind patterns and ice formations, learning to spot danger before it became deadly. The signs in his own home were just as clear if you knew how to look. He started with the simple things. Phone records showed calls to a number he didn't recognize, usually during his deployment months. The cell phone bill revealed location data putting her phone at places other than the hospital during her supposed shifts. A check of their joint credit card showed charges at restaurants where Nadine claimed she'd never been. Hotel charges during times when she said she was working late. Expensive lingerie purchases that she'd never worn for him. But Silas needed more than circumstantial evidence. He needed proof that would hold up in court. He installed a small security camera in their bedroom, hidden behind a picture frame. The kind of wireless device he used to monitor equipment on his ship. Simple, effective, invisible. For 3 days, nothing. Then Nadine called in sick to work, but left the house dressed up, saying she had errands to run. The camera caught everything when she returned 2 hours later with a man Silas didn't recognize. Tall, athletic, confident. He moved through Silas's house like he owned it, knew where the coffee cups were kept, which bathroom to use. They went upstairs together, and the bedroom camera recorded 43 minutes of his wife having sex with another man in the bed, where their daughter had been conceived. Silas watched the footage on his laptop in the basement, his expression never changing. When it was over, he saved the files to 3 different devices and uploaded backups to a secure cloud server. The man's face had been clear in several shots. A reverse image search led to a LinkedIn profile. Dr. Tyree Gillen, emergency physician at St. Julian's Hospital. Married, 2 kids, 5 years younger than Silas. Posted photos of himself running marathons and climbing mountains. The kind of man who collected experiences like trophies. Silas spent the next day learning everything about Tyree Gillen. Social media gave him the man's habits, his favorite restaurants, his weekend routines. Public records revealed his home address, his wife's name, his children's school. Medical board listings showed 2 previous ethics violations that had been quietly resolved. The picture that emerged was of a man who took what he wanted and relied on his charm and position to avoid consequences. Silas had met plenty of men like that in his years at sea. They usually learned hard lessons about the difference between confidence and competence when the storms hit. But this storm would be different. This storm would be carefully planned and precisely executed. Silas's phone rang while he was reviewing financial statements at the kitchen table. Maya calling from school. "Dad, can you pick me up? I'm not feeling good." 20 minutes later, she climbed into his truck looking pale and shaky. Instead of driving straight home, he pulled into the parking lot of a McDonald's and bought her a Coke. "What's wrong, kiddo?" Maya stared out the window. "Some girls at school were talking about Mom, saying she's been seen around town with some guy when you're gone." Silas felt something cold settle in his chest. "What girls?" "Jessica's mom works at the hospital. She said—" Maya's voice cracked. "She said Mom's been acting different at work, more secretive. And that Dr. Gillen has been asking about you, like when you're coming back and stuff." Silas reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand. "What do you think about all this?" "I think Mom's been weird since you got back, like happy but nervous at the same time. And she's been cleaning the house a lot, like she's erasing something." Smart kid. Silas had raised her to notice details, to think for herself. Now those skills were breaking her heart. "Dad, are you guys getting divorced?" "I don't know yet, Maya, but whatever happens, you and I will be okay. I promise you that." That evening, Nadine worked late again, or claimed to. Silas used the time to make copies of all their financial documents and open a separate bank account. He transferred Maya's college fund into a trust with himself as the sole trustee, legally protecting it from any divorce proceedings. He also made a call to Janet Walsh, the best divorce attorney in Duluth. Former prosecutor known for thorough preparation and ruthless courtroom tactics. He scheduled a consultation for the following week, after his next conversation with Dr. Gillen. The Saint. Julian's Hospital annual fundraising gala was held every December at the Duluth Entertainment Convention Center. Nadine had been excited about it for weeks, buying a new dress and getting her hair done. She looked beautiful that night, radiant in a way that made Silas's chest tight with old affection and new fury. They made small talk with other couples, Nadine's hand light on his arm, playing the role of devoted wife. She introduced him to colleagues, including several doctors from the emergency department. Dr. Gillen wasn't among them. Silas excused himself to get drinks and found Tyree near the silent auction tables, examining a donated fishing trip package. Up close, the man was everything his photo suggested. Confident posture, expensive watch, the kind of smile that probably worked on everyone except ship captains who'd learned to read dangerous currents. "Dr. Gillen." Tyree turned, extending his hand automatically. "I don't think we've met." "Silas Creel, Nadine's husband." The change in Tyree's expression was subtle, but unmistakable. A tightening around the eyes, a slight shift in posture. He'd heard the name before. "Ah, the ship captain. Nadine talks about you all the time. Glad to finally meet you." Silas shook the offered hand, applying just enough pressure to make a point. "I'm sure she does." He pulled a manila envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to Tyree. "Photos from our recent vacation. Thought you might enjoy seeing them." Tyree took the envelope reflexively, then glanced around at the crowded gala. "I'm not sure I understand. Open it when you get home. I think you'll find them very educational." Silas walked away without another word, leaving Tyree standing frozen by the auction tables, envelope in hand. The drive home was quiet. Nadine chatted about the event, mentioned how nice everyone had been, asked if he'd enjoyed meeting her colleagues. Silas made appropriate responses while watching her in his peripheral vision. She seemed genuinely happy, unaware that her world had just shifted on its axis. "Who was that man you were talking to by the auction?" she asked as they pulled into their driveway. "Dr. Gillen. You work with him, don't you?" A pause. Just a heartbeat, but enough. "Yes, sometimes. He's an emergency. Why?" "Just being polite. You always tell me to socialize more at these things." Nadine laughed, the sound only slightly forced. "True. I'm proud of you for making the effort." Inside the envelope Silas had given Tyree were 3 high-resolution photos from the bedroom camera, Clear shots of the doctor's face during intimate moments, date and timestamps visible. Nothing erotic that could be dismissed as revenge fantasy, but unmistakably real and unmistakably damaging. Also in the envelope was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and the words, "Call me tomorrow, 10 a.m. Come alone." Tyree called at exactly 10 a.m. "What do you want?" No pretense, no denials. The man was smarter than Silas had given him credit for. "To talk. There's a coffee shop called Superior Grounds on 4th Street. 1 hour." "I can't just 1 hour, doctor, or I call your wife and the medical board in that order." Silas arrived early and chose a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. When Tyree walked in, his face was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he ordered coffee. He sat across from Silas like a man approaching a firing squad. "How long?" Silas asked. 8 months. "My house?" "Sometimes. She said you wouldn't be back until spring." Silas nodded. "What's the plan? Divorce me, marry you?" Tyree shifted uncomfortably. "It's complicated. My situation. Your wife doesn't know." "No." "Kids?" "2 boys, 8 and 10. Silas studied the younger man's face. Fear, guilt, but also calculation. Still looking for angles, still hoping to manipulate his way out of consequences. "Here's what's going to happen," Silas said, his voice never rising above conversational volume. "You're going to end things with my wife. Today. You're going to tell her it was a mistake and that you've decided to work on your marriage. And if I don't?" Silas pulled out his phone and showed Tyree a photo of an email draft addressed to the state medical board. The subject line read, "Formal complaint, Dr. Tyree Gillen, ethics violations and patient endangerment. I've been doing research, doctor. Your prescription patterns are interesting. A lot of controlled substances going to patients who don't seem to exist in the hospital database. Pain medications prescribed to your address. Want to explain that?" Tyree's face went white. "You can't prove anything." "I don't have to prove it. I just have to report it. The investigation will prove it for me." Silas leaned forward slightly. "How long do you think you'll keep your license once they start digging?" "You fool." "Maybe. But I'm not the one sleeping with another man's wife and stealing substances from cancer patients." Silas stood to leave, then paused. "Oh, and doctor, don't make me come looking for you. I know these waters better than you know yours." That afternoon, Nadine came home early from her shift, crying. She went straight to their bedroom and slammed the door. Silas found her an hour later, sitting on the bed where she betrayed him, mascara streaked down her cheeks. "He ended it," she said without looking up. "I said it was a mistake, that he wants to work on his marriage." Silas sat in the chair by the window, the same spot where he'd set up the camera. "Who ended what?" She looked at him then, searching his face for signs of knowledge or judgment. Finding neither, she seemed to deflate. "I've been seeing someone. While you were gone, it's over now." "Okay. That's it? Just okay?" "What do you want me to say, Nadine?" She stood up, anger flashing in her eyes. "I want you to care. I want you to fight for me, or scream at me, or something. You've been gone 9 months out of every year for 14 years. I was lonely, and he made me feel alive again. And now he doesn't. No, now he doesn't." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "So what happens now?" "I don't know. I need to think." But Silas already knew exactly what happened now. The first phase was complete. Tyree had been neutralized as an immediate threat, but not destroyed. Nadine was emotionally vulnerable, cut off from her source of validation and support. Now came the real work. Over the next week, Silas watched his wife carefully. She threw herself into work with manic energy, picking up extra shifts and staying late for paperwork that could have waited. She avoided eye contact during their brief conversations and slept on the far edge of their bed, as if afraid to accidentally touch him. Maya noticed the tension immediately. She asked fewer questions and spent more time in her room, headphones on, creating distance from her parents' Cold War. Silas made sure to maintain normal interactions with his daughter, helping with homework and driving her to basketball practice, trying to shield her from the worst of what was coming, because something was definitely coming. Silas had spent too many years reading weather patterns to miss the signs of a building storm. The first sign was financial. A review of their joint accounts showed that Nadine had been moving small amounts of money into a separate savings account over the past 6 months. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alerts, but a steady drain that suggested advanced planning. The second sign was legal. A discreet call to a private investigator he'd used for maritime insurance cases revealed that Nadine had met with a divorce attorney 3 weeks before Silas returned from his last deployment. She'd been planning her exit strategy while still sleeping with Tyree, hedging her bets in case the affair didn't work out. The third sign was professional. Conversations with other hospital spouses revealed that Nadine had been bad-mouthing Silas for months, painting him as an absent, emotionally distant husband who cared more about his ship than his family. She'd been building a narrative that would support her in divorce proceedings. But the most damning sign was personal. While cleaning out some boxes in the basement, Silas found a folder hidden behind old Christmas decorations. Inside were printouts of his pension information, calculations of their home's current market value, and notes about Minnesota's divorce laws written in Nadine's handwriting. She hadn't just betrayed him. She'd been systematically planning to destroy him. That night, after Nadine left for another late shift, Silas made several phone calls. The first was to his lawyer, authorizing her to begin divorce proceedings immediately. The second was to his union representative, ensuring that his pension would be protected through the upcoming legal battle. The third was to a private investigator, requesting a complete background check on both Nadine and Tyree. The fourth call was to Child Protective Services. "I'd like to report a concern about a child's welfare," he told the intake worker. "I believe my daughter may be at risk due to my wife's recent behavior and the presence of unknown adults in our home while I'm at work." It wasn't technically a lie. There had been an unknown adult in their home, Tyree. And Nadine's emotional instability over the past week could reasonably be seen as concerning for Maya's well-being. The fact that the affair was over didn't negate the months when it had been ongoing. CPS would investigate, find no immediate danger, and close the case within a few weeks. But the investigation would create an official record of Nadine's compromised judgment and bring unwanted scrutiny to her work at the hospital, where any hint of scandal could damage her reputation irreparably. The social worker arrived unannounced on Tuesday morning while Nadine was sleeping after a night shift. Maya was at school, so Silas was alone when he answered the door. "Mr. Creel, I'm Sandra Hayes from Child Protective Services. We received a report about possible concerns regarding your daughter's welfare." Silas invited her in, playing the role of confused but cooperative father. He explained that he'd recently returned from months at sea to find his wife behaving strangely, mood swings, secretiveness, bringing unknown people to their house. He was worried about Maya's emotional well-being, but wasn't sure what steps to take. The social worker took notes and asked to see Maya's room, the kitchen, the general living conditions. Everything was clean and well-maintained, exactly what Silas had ensured it would be. "Is your wife available to speak with me?" "She's sleeping. She worked a double shift last night at the hospital, but I can wake her if you need." "That would be helpful." Nadine appeared 20 minutes later in her robe, hair disheveled, clearly disoriented by being woken up. Her confusion turned to horror when she saw the CPS badge. "I don't understand. What's this about?" Sandra Hayes explained the report while Nadine's face cycled through shock, anger, and dawning realization. Her eyes found Silas across the room, and he saw the moment she understood who had made the call. "This is ridiculous. There's no danger to Maya. She's a straight-A student, involved in sports, happy and healthy." "I'm sure that's true, Mrs. Creel. This is just a preliminary investigation to rule out any concerns. Can you tell me about any recent changes in your household or routine?" Nadine glanced at Silas again, trapped between truth and self-preservation. "My husband has been away at sea for 9 months. His return has been an adjustment for all of us." "Any other adults who spend time in the home?" A pause. "No, just family." The lie hung in the air like smoke. Sandra Hayes made a note. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering Maya's school performance, medical history, and general well-being. Nadine answered truthfully but stiffly, aware that every word was being recorded and evaluated. When the social worker left, Nadine turned on Silas with fury that had been building for an hour. "You called them on me, your own wife. I called them because I was concerned about our daughter. Bullcrap. This is about the affair. You're trying to destroy me." Silas met her gaze steadily. "If you're destroyed, Nadine, it won't be because of anything I did." She slapped him then, hard enough to snap his head to the side. He absorbed the blow without flinching, which seemed to enrage her further. 14 years of marriage. 14 years of me holding this family together while you play sailor. And this is how you handle one mistake." "One mistake?" Silas touched his cheek where her hand had connected. 8 months of bringing another man into our bed isn't one mistake. It's a choice you made every single time." "I was lonely." "You were married." Nadine's face crumpled, And for a moment, she looked like the woman he'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. Young, vulnerable, full of dreams about their future together. Then the moment passed, and she was a stranger again. "What do you want from me, Silas?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences." The CPS case was closed within 2 weeks, as Silas had expected. No evidence of misuse or neglect, no ongoing danger to Maya's welfare. But the damage was done. Word spread through the hospital staff that Nadine Creel was being investigated by social services. Whispers followed her through the halls, speculation about what kind of mother attracted CPS attention. Her supervisor called her in for a private meeting to discuss the situation. Nothing official, just a friendly conversation about whether there were any personal issues affecting her work performance. Nadine denied everything, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Meanwhile, Silas continued his own investigation into Tyree's activities. The private investigator he'd hired was thorough and discreet, with contacts throughout the medical community. What she found exceeded even Silas's expectations. Dr. Tyree Gillen had a pattern of inappropriate relationships with hospital staff dating back 5 years. 2 previous complaints had been quietly settled to avoid scandal, but the behavior had continued. He was also skimming controlled substances from the pharmacy, supposedly for personal use, but possibly for resale. His medical practice was ethical and competent, but his personal conduct was a liability the hospital couldn't afford to ignore. Armed with this information, Silas made another call, this time to the hospital's chief of staff. "Dr. Morrison? This is Captain Silas Creel. My wife Nadine works in your trauma center." "Yes, of course. How can I help you, Captain?" "I have some information about one of your emergency physicians that I think you should be aware of, Dr. Tyree Gillen. It concerns patient safety and potential legal liability for the hospital." There was a pause. "That's a serious allegation. Can you be more specific?" "I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Are you available this afternoon?" They met in Dr. Morrison's office at 3 p.m. Silas brought copies of his investigator's report, the prescription records showing suspicious patterns, and carefully edited portions of his bedroom surveillance footage that showed Tyree in his house during times when the doctor was supposed to be on call. "I'm not here to cause trouble for the hospital," Silas explained, "but I thought you should know what kind of risk Dr. Gillen represents before something happens that could expose St. Julian's to liability." Dr. Morrison reviewed the documents with the careful attention of someone who'd dealt with personnel problems before. When he finished, his expression was grim. "This is very concerning. If these allegations are accurate, Doctor, Gillen has violated multiple hospital policies and potentially broken several laws. I understand his medical skills are excellent, but his judgment appears compromised." "Indeed." Dr. Morrison leaned back in his chair. "What outcome are you looking for here, Captain?" "I want him gone, quietly, professionally, but permanently. And I want it on record that his departure was due to policy violations, not personal disputes." "That may be possible, depending on what our internal investigation reveals." Silas stood to leave. "I trust you'll handle this appropriately, Doctor. The hospital's reputation is important to this community." 2 days later, Tyree was called into a meeting with Dr. Morrison and the hospital's legal counsel. Presented with evidence of his policy violations and the potential liability they created, he was given a choice: resign immediately with a neutral reference, or face formal disciplinary proceedings that would become part of his permanent medical record. He chose resignation, effective immediately. Nadine heard about it through the hospital gossip network before any official announcement was made. She came home that evening pale and shaken, having realized that Tyree's sudden departure wasn't coincidental. "You destroyed him," she said, standing in the kitchen doorway while Silas made dinner. "He destroyed himself. I just made sure the right people knew about it. His career is over. No hospital will hire him now." "Then he shouldn't have been stealing pills and sleeping with married women." Nadine's hands clenched into fists. "You're enjoying this." Silas turned from the stove to look at her directly. "No, Nadine, I'm not enjoying any of this, but I'm not going to pretend it isn't necessary. What happens next? Do you destroy me too?" "That depends on you." Maya chose that moment to walk into the kitchen, backpack slung over her shoulder, looking between her parents with the wary expression she'd worn for weeks. "What's for dinner?" she asked, clearly trying to restore some normalcy to the room. "Spaghetti," Silas said, forcing a smile. "Your favorite." They ate in tense silence. Maya filling the quiet with chatter about her day at school, her upcoming basketball tournament, anything to avoid the elephant in the room. After dinner, she disappeared to her room to do homework, leaving her parents alone again. "We need to talk about Maya," Nadine said finally. "What about her?" "About what this is doing to her. The fighting, the tension, the CPS visit. She's 14, Silas. She doesn't deserve to be caught in the middle of our problems." "You're right. She doesn't deserve any of this. So what do we do?" Silas had been thinking about that question for weeks. Maya was his primary concern, the one innocent person in this mess who deserved protection rather than punishment. Whatever happened between him and Nadine, their daughter needed stability and security. "We get divorced," he said simply. Quickly, quietly, with as little drama as possible. Nadine stared at him. "Just like that? What did you expect? That we'd go to counseling and work through your affair? That I'd forgive and forget and we'd renew our vows?" "I hoped. I don't know what I hoped." "The marriage is over, Nadine. It was over the moment you brought him into our bed. Now we just need to make sure Maya comes through this okay." "And what about custody?" "Primary custody to me. You can have visitation rights, but Maya stays with me." "That's not happening." Nadine's voice turned sharp. "She's my daughter, too." "Your daughter who was exposed to God knows what while you were sneaking around with your boyfriend. Your daughter who's been covering for your lies and mood swings for months. I never put her at risk. You put our entire family at risk, Maya included." They stared at each other across the kitchen table, the battle lines finally drawn. Nadine's face had hardened into the expression Silas had learned to recognize over the years, stubborn determination mixed with self-righteous anger. "Fine," she said, "if that's how you want to play it. But don't expect me to make this easy for you." "I never expected easy, Nadine, but I did expect better." She left the house that night, saying she was going to stay with her sister until they could figure out living arrangements. Maya came downstairs an hour later, having obviously been listening from her room. "Is Mom really gone?" "For now." "Are you guys getting divorced?" Silas nodded. "I'm sorry, kiddo. I know this isn't what you wanted." Maya sat down next to him on the couch, curling up against his side like she used to when she was little. "Can I stay with you? If that's what you want?" "It is. Mom's been different. Even before you came home. Like she was angry all the time but trying to hide it." "She's been going through some things. Adults sometimes make choices that hurt the people they love." "Because of that doctor guy?" Silas looked down at his daughter, surprised by how much she'd figured out on her own. "What do you know about him?" "I saw him here a couple times when you were gone. Mom said he was just a friend from work, but..." She shrugged. "I'm not stupid, Dad." "No, you're not. You're smarter than both your parents put together." "Will I still get to see Mom?" "Of course. We just won't all be living together anymore." Maya was quiet for a long moment. "Is it my fault? The divorce?" "God, no." Silas pulled her closer. "None of this is your fault, Maya, not any of it." But as he held his daughter and felt her shoulders shake with silent tears, Silas wondered if he was lying. Maybe if he'd been a better husband, more present, more emotionally available, Nadine wouldn't have looked elsewhere for what she needed. Maybe if he had chosen a different career, one that didn't take him away for months at a time, their marriage could have survived. Then, he remembered the folder hidden in the basement, the calculated planning that had gone into Nadine's betrayal, and his moment of self-doubt passed. Some people made choices that couldn't be explained or excused by loneliness or neglect. Some people were just willing to destroy what they had in pursuit of what they wanted. Nadine was one of those people. The divorce proceedings began 2 weeks later. Nadine hired an aggressive attorney who immediately filed for temporary spousal support, half of their assets, and joint custody of Maya. She painted Silas as a controlling, absent husband who was retaliating against her for seeking emotional fulfillment elsewhere. Silas's attorney, Janet Walsh, was ready for the fight. She had the financial records showing Nadine's secret savings account, the CPS report documenting concerns about Maya's welfare, and character witnesses who could testify to Silas's reputation as a responsible father and community member. What she didn't have yet was the surveillance footage from the bedroom camera. Silas was holding that in reserve, waiting for the right moment to deploy it. That moment came during Nadine's deposition, when her attorney suggested that Silas's allegations of infidelity were unsubstantiated and motivated by spite. "Mrs. Creel," Janet Walsh said calmly, Are you claiming that you never had a sexual relationship with Dr. Tyree Gillen? Nadine's attorney objected, but the question hung in the air. Nadine shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I refuse to answer that question. You refuse to answer whether you committed infidelity. I refuse to answer personal questions about my private relationships. Janet Walsh smiled. I see. And were any of these private relationships conducted in the marital home while your husband was at sea? Another objection, overruled. Nadine looked trapped. That's not relevant to our custody arrangement. Actually, Mrs. Creel, it's very relevant. Exposing a minor child to adult situations and unknown individuals in the home is a significant factor in custody determinations. The deposition continued for another hour, with Nadine's story becoming more contradictory with each question. By the end, it was clear that she'd been caught in multiple lies about her activities during Silas's absence. That evening, her attorney called with a settlement offer. Nadine would accept a smaller financial settlement and limited custody in exchange for Silas not releasing evidence of her infidelity. What evidence? Janet Walsh asked innocently. Don't play games, counselor. We know your client has some kind of documentation. We're willing to negotiate to keep this out of court. I'll discuss it with my client. Silas listened to the offer and considered it carefully. A quick settlement would be easier on Maya, less public scrutiny, fewer opportunities for things to get ugly. But it would also mean that Nadine faced no real consequences for her choices, that she could walk away from the wreckage of their marriage with minimal damage to her reputation or career. No deal, he told Janet. Let's go to trial. Are you sure? Trials are unpredictable, and the footage you have is explosive. It could make things very ugly very quickly. Nadine made things ugly when she brought another man into my bed. I'm just making sure there are consequences. The trial was scheduled for March, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. Nadine moved in with her sister and began a campaign to rehabilitate her image, telling anyone who would listen that Silas was a vindictive husband who couldn't accept that their marriage had simply run its course. She also began showing up at Maya's school events and basketball games, playing the role of devoted mother, trying to maintain a relationship with her daughter despite her husband's unreasonable demands. Maya tolerated these appearances, but didn't encourage them, which only seemed to make Nadine more desperate. Meanwhile, Silas focused on his relationship with his daughter and his preparation for the trial. He also began making plans for his return to sea, knowing that he'd need the income to support 2 households and pay for Maya's college education. But first, he had one more conversation to have with Dr. Tyree Gillen. The former physician had taken a job at a private clinic in Minneapolis, a significant step down from his previous position, but the best he could do with his compromised reputation. Silas tracked him down at a coffee shop near the clinic, arriving early to ensure privacy. Tyree looked older, thinner, worn down by the consequences of his choices. When he saw Silas approaching, his face cycled through fear, anger, and resignation. What do you want now? He asked as Silas sat down across from him. To make sure we understand each other. I lost my job, my reputation, my marriage is falling apart. What more do you want? I want to make sure you understand that this isn't over. Tyree's hands tightened around his coffee cup. What do you mean? I mean that if you ever contact my wife again, if you ever come near my daughter, if you ever set foot in Duluth again, I will release every piece of evidence I have about your activities at St. Julian's. The prescription fraud, the stolen substances, the pattern of inappropriate relationships. All of it. You already destroyed my career. No, I ended your career at one hospital. I can destroy your ability to practice medicine anywhere in the country. Tyree's face went pale. You can't prove the prescription thing. I don't have to prove it. I just have to report it to the right people and let them investigate. How long do you think your medical license will survive that kind of scrutiny? What do you want from me? Nothing. I want you to disappear. I want you to stay disappeared. And I want you to understand that if you don't, the consequences will be permanent and irreversible. Silas stood to leave, then paused. Oh, and doctor, if anything happens to me, accident, illness, whatever, all that evidence gets released automatically. So you have a vested interest in my continued good health. He walked away without looking back, leaving Tyree alone with his coffee and his fears. The trial began on a cold March morning with snow falling steadily outside the courthouse windows. Nadine arrived with her attorney and a small group of supporters from the hospital, playing the role of wronged woman fighting for her rights. Silas came alone except for Janet Walsh, dressed in his best suit, calm and composed as he'd been throughout the entire ordeal. Maya was not required to testify, but she was present in the courtroom, sitting behind her father's table where her mother couldn't make eye contact with her. The first day was mostly procedural, with both attorneys outlining their cases for the judge. Nadine's lawyer painted her as a devoted mother and professional who had made one mistake in an otherwise exemplary life. Silas was portrayed as a controlling husband who couldn't forgive a moment of human weakness. Janet Walsh's opening statement was more direct. "Your Honor, this case is about accountability. Mrs. Creel didn't make one mistake. She made a series of calculated decisions over 8 months that betrayed her marriage vows, endangered her child's welfare, and violated the trust that is fundamental to any family." The second day brought testimony from character witnesses. Nadine's supporters spoke about her dedication to her patients, her love for her daughter, her struggles with the loneliness of being married to a man who was gone for months at a time. Silas's witnesses were fewer but more specific. Maya's basketball coach, who testified about the girl's emotional distress during her mother's affair, a neighbor who had seen unfamiliar cars in the Creel driveway during Silas's absence, Dr. Morrison from the hospital, who described the concerns that had led to Dr. Gillen's resignation. On the third day, Janet Walsh played the surveillance footage. The courtroom fell silent as the images flickered on the screen. Nothing explicitly erotic, but unmistakably intimate. Nadine and Tyree in the marital bedroom, their body language leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Nadine's face crumpled as she watched herself on screen. Several of her supporters quietly left the courtroom. Even her attorney looked shaken by the stark evidence of her infidelity. "Your Honor," Janet Walsh said as the footage ended, "Mrs. Creel has consistently denied the extent of her relationship with Dr. Gillen. This evidence, recorded in the defendant's own home, speaks for itself." Nadine's attorney tried to object on privacy grounds, but the damage was done. The footage had been legally obtained by Silas in his own home, and it directly contradicted his client's sworn testimony. The final day of trial was devoted to closing arguments. Nadine's lawyer made an emotional plea about forgiveness, about the pressures of modern marriage, about not punishing a child for her mother's mistakes. Janet Walsh was more pragmatic. "This isn't about punishment, Your Honor. It's about protecting a 14-year-old girl who has already been through enough trauma, Mrs. Creel's choices have consequences, and those consequences include losing the right to primary custody of her daughter." The judge took a recess to consider his decision. When court reconvened 2 hours later, his expression was grave. This has been a difficult case involving painful testimony and evidence. However, the court must consider the best interests of the minor child above all other factors. He awarded primary custody to Silas, with Nadine receiving supervised visitation rights every other weekend. The marital assets were divided, with Silas receiving the house and the majority of their savings, while Nadine was ordered to pay child support based on her hospital salary. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court is troubled by evidence suggesting that Mrs. Creel exposed her minor child to inappropriate situations during her extramarital relationship. Any future custody modifications will require clear evidence that she has addressed these judgment issues. Nadine sobbed openly as the judgment was read. Her sister had to help her from the courtroom, while Maya sat quietly beside her father, processing what this meant for her future. Outside the courthouse, Nadine's attorney made a brief statement about appealing the decision. Nadine herself said nothing, her face hidden behind sunglasses as she hurried to her sister's car. Silas and Maya drove home in silence through the falling snow. Only when they were in their driveway did Maya speak. "Is it really over?" "The legal part is. Your mom might appeal, but that will take months." "What about the other part?" Silas looked at his daughter, struck again by her perceptiveness. "What other part?" "The part where you're still angry." He considered the question carefully. Was he still angry? Yes, but the white-hot fury that had driven him through months of investigation and legal maneuvering was cooling into something else. Not forgiveness, but a kind of tired satisfaction that justice had been served. "I'm working on that," he said finally. "Good, because I need you to be my dad, not Mom's enemy. I can do that." That evening, while Maya was at a friend's house, Silas sat in his kitchen with a beer and a pile of mail that had accumulated during the trial. Among the bills and advertisements was a letter from his shipping company, confirming his next deployment. He was scheduled to leave in 2 weeks for a 3-month run to Thunder Bay and back. For the first time in months, the prospect of returning to sea felt like relief rather than escape. Out there, surrounded by water and weather he understood, He could find his equilibrium again. He could be Captain Creel instead of the wronged husband, could focus on navigation and cargo instead of revenge and retribution. But first, he had one final conversation to have. Nadine had been staying at her sister's house since the trial, but she still had a key to their house and a few belongings to collect. She called that weekend to arrange a time when Maya would be out, presumably to avoid another emotional scene. She arrived on Sunday afternoon looking haggard and older than her 42 years. The stress of the trial and its aftermath had taken a visible toll, carving new lines around her eyes and mouth. "I just need to get my things," she said without meeting his eyes. "Take whatever you want. I'll be in the basement." But 20 minutes later, she found him there anyway, standing among the boxes where he'd discovered her hidden planning documents months ago. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. Silas looked up from the old Christmas decorations he'd been sorting. Which part? The affair, the lies, or the attempt to take everything in the divorce? Any of it. All of it. She sat down on the basement steps, suddenly looking exhausted. "I just wanted to feel alive again. And now? Now I feel like I'm drowning." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the detritus of their shared life. Boxes of Maya's childhood artwork, old photo albums, Christmas ornaments from holidays when they'd been happy. "I know you won't believe this," Nadine said finally, "but I did love you. Maybe not the way you needed, but I did love you. I believe you, but love isn't enough if you don't respect what you love. I know that now. Do you? Or do you just know that there are consequences for disrespecting it?" She flinched at the harshness in his voice, but didn't argue. "What happens now, Silas? Between us? Nothing happens between us. You see Maya every other weekend under supervision until she's 18. You pay your child support on time. You rebuild whatever life you can with what's left. And you? I go back to sea. I raise our daughter. I try to remember why I used to think we were good together." Nadine's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry." "I know you are. But sorry doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change what has to happen next." She nodded and went back upstairs to finish collecting her belongings. An hour later, she was gone, taking nothing but her clothes and a few personal items. Everything else, the furniture they'd bought together, the dishes they'd received as wedding gifts, the photos of happier times, she left behind. Maya came home that evening to find her father cooking dinner and her mother's presence completely erased from the house. If she noticed the absence of family photos from the mantelpiece or the empty space in the master bedroom closet, she didn't mention it. "How was your day with Sarah?" Silas asked as they sat down to eat. "Good. We went to the mall and saw a movie." She paused, then added carefully, "Her mom asked about you and Mom, about the divorce. What did you tell her?" "That it's complicated, but we're okay." "Are we okay?" Maya considered the question seriously. "I think we will be. It might take a while, but yeah." 2 weeks later, Silas returned to his ship for the first time since the previous November. The MV Iron Range was a 740-foot bulk carrier that had been his command for 8 years, and stepping aboard felt like coming home after a long and difficult journey. His crew greeted him with the restrained professionalism that marked Great Lakes sailors, but he caught several of them exchanging glances. Word had spread through the maritime community about his divorce, as news always did in their tight-knit world. "Captain," his first mate said as they prepared to leave port. "Good to have you back." "Good to be back, Patterson." "How's Maya handling everything?" "She's strong, stronger than either of her parents, probably." Patterson nodded. He had teenagers of his own and understood the complexities of modern family life. "Kids are resilient, more than we give them credit for." As the Iron Range pulled away from the Duluth docks, Silas stood on the bridge and watched the city recede into the distance. Somewhere back there, Nadine was starting her new life as a single mother with limited custody and a damaged reputation. Tyree was working at his diminished job in Minneapolis, looking over his shoulder and wondering when the other shoe would drop. Maya was at school, focused on her studies and her basketball team, building a life that was more stable and honest than what she'd had before. And Silas was back where he belonged, commanding a ship full of iron ore across waters that had tested men for generations. Out here, the rules were simple, and the consequences clear. You respected the lake or it eliminated you. You took care of your crew or they suffered. You navigated with precision or you ran aground. It was, he reflected, a much more honest way to live than what he'd left behind on shore. The 3-month voyage passed quickly, with good weather and no mechanical problems. Silas found his rhythm again, the daily routines of command and navigation restoring his sense of purpose. He called Maya every few days via satellite phone, checking on her grades and her games, making sure she was handling her mother's limited visits okay. She was. If anything, Maya seemed more confident and relaxed with the drama of the divorce behind them. She was making new friends, excelling in school, talking about colleges and career plans with the optimism of someone who believed in her future. When Silas returned to Duluth in June, he found his daughter tan and happy from a successful basketball season. She'd grown 2 inches and was talking about trying out for the varsity team as a sophomore. "How was Mom's last visit?" he asked as they drove home from the dock. "Weird. She cried a lot and kept apologizing for things. I told her I just wanted to move forward, but I don't think she knows how." "That's not your problem to solve, kiddo." "I know, but it's still sad." Silas agreed that it was sad. The destruction of a marriage, even one that had been fundamentally flawed, was always tragic. But sadness was different from regret, and he felt no regret about the choices he'd made or their consequences. Over the summer, he heard occasional updates about his ex-wife through the small-town network that connected everyone in Duluth. Nadine had taken a job at a clinic in Minneapolis, closer to her sister. She was seeing a therapist and had joined some kind of support group for divorced women. She sent Maya cards and letters that were full of love and remorse, but offered no real insight into how she planned to rebuild her life. Tyree had disappeared entirely, leaving Minneapolis for parts unknown. Some said he'd moved to California. Others thought he'd gone overseas. Silas didn't care enough to investigate. In August, Maya asked if she could spend a weekend with her mother in Minneapolis. It would be the first unsupervised visit since the divorce, a significant step in their relationship. "Are you ready for that?" Silas asked. "I think so. She's still my mom, even if she made some really bad choices. Just remember that you don't have to fix her problems or manage her emotions. You're the kid in this relationship." "I know, Dad. You taught me that." The weekend went well. Maya returned home with stories about shopping with her aunt and visiting the Minneapolis Institute of Arts with her mother. Nadine had been calm and focused on spending quality time with her daughter rather than rehashing past mistakes. It was, Silas thought, the first sign that his ex-wife might actually be capable of learning from her experiences. His next deployment was scheduled for September, another 3-month run that would take him through the fall shipping season. As the date approached, Silas found himself reluctant to leave Maya alone for so long, even though she'd proven herself capable and responsible. "I'll be fine, Dad," she assured him. "Mrs. Patterson said I can stay with them anytime I want, and Aunt Carol is only 3 hours away if there's an emergency." "What about your mom?" Maya considered this carefully. "Maybe for a weekend or 2, but this is my home now with you." On his last night before shipping out, Silas and Maya had dinner at their favorite restaurant overlooking Lake Superior. The water was calm and dark, reflecting the lights of the harbor and the distant glow of the Canadian shore. "Do you ever regret it?" Maya asked as they shared dessert. "The way you handled everything with Mom?" It was a question Silas had asked himself many times over the past year. Had he been too harsh, too calculating, too unforgiving? Had he destroyed his marriage out of pride rather than principle? "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally. "I regret that your mother made choices that forced me to respond the way I did. But no, I don't regret holding her accountable for those choices. Even though it hurt her, even though it hurt all of us. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do." Maya nodded, satisfied with his answer. She was old enough now to understand that adult relationships were complicated, that love alone wasn't enough to sustain a marriage, that trust once broken was nearly impossible to rebuild. The next morning, Silas returned to sea for what would be his final voyage of the year. As the Iron Range made its way across Lake Superior toward Thunder Bay, he thought about the year that had passed since he'd first discovered Nadine's betrayal. He'd lost a marriage but gained clarity about what he valued most. He'd been forced to become harder and more calculating than he'd ever wanted to be, but he'd also protected his daughter and preserved his own dignity. He'd learned that revenge could be both satisfying and hollow, that justice and healing were different things entirely. Most importantly, he'd learned that some storms, no matter how devastating, could be weathered and survived. When he returned to Duluth in December, almost exactly 1 year after receiving his STD test results, Silas found Maya thriving. She'd made the varsity basketball team, was maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and had begun talking seriously about college scholarships. She'd also been having regular phone conversations with her mother, rebuilding their relationship slowly and carefully. Nadine had started dating someone new, a widowed teacher who understood the complexities of blended families and damaged histories. "She seems happier," Maya reported after their latest call. "Like she's finally figured out who she wants to be." "Good for her." "Do you mean that?" Silas considered the question. Did he want Nadine to be happy? After everything she'd put their family through, after the lies and betrayal and calculated deception, did he genuinely hope she found peace and fulfillment in her new life? "Yes," he said, surprised to realize it was true. "I do mean that." "Why?" "Because her happiness means you get to have a healthy relationship with your mother. And because carrying around anger is like carrying around poison, it hurts the person holding it more than anyone else." That night, after Maya had gone to bed, Silas sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee and thought about the future. He had another 10 years before mandatory retirement, 10 years of voyages across the Great Lakes before he'd be forced to find a new way to make a living. Maya would graduate high school in 3 years, then college 4 years after that. By the time she was truly on her own, he'd be ready to step back from the water and figure out what came next. Maybe he'd buy a small boat and offer fishing charters to tourists. Maybe he'd teach navigation classes at the Maritime Academy. Maybe he'd just read books and learned to garden and figure out how to be content with a quiet life on shore. The possibilities stretched ahead of him like open water, full of potential and uncertainty in equal measure. It was a good feeling, he realized. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to whatever came next. 2 weeks before Christmas, Maya asked if she could invite her mother for dinner. "Just dinner," she clarified quickly. "Not to stay overnight or anything. But it's been a year since everything happened, and I think we should try to be normal around each other." Silas's first instinct was to refuse. The house was their sanctuary now, the place where they'd rebuilt their lives after Nadine's betrayal. Inviting her back felt like opening a door that had been deliberately and permanently closed. But as he looked at his daughter's hopeful face, he realized this wasn't about him and Nadine anymore. This was about Maya's need to have both her parents in the same room without drama or tension, to prove to herself that their family could exist in some form, even after everything that had happened. "Okay," he said, "but we keep it simple. Dinner, conversation, then she goes home." "Thank you, Dad." Nadine arrived on the designated evening looking nervous but determined. She'd brought a bottle of wine and a gift from Maya, a book about women in sports that showed she'd been paying attention to her daughter's interests. The meal was awkward at first, filled with careful conversation about safe topics like Maya's school performance and the upcoming basketball season. But gradually, as they remembered how to be civil to each other, the tension began to ease. "This is good," Nadine said, indicating the roast chicken Silas had prepared. "You always were a better cook than me. I had more practice, all those years cooking for myself on the ship." "Do you miss it? Being away so much?" It was a loaded question, containing multiple layers of meaning and history. Did he miss the isolation that had contributed to their marriage's problems? Did he miss being absent while she'd been lonely and vulnerable to temptation? "I miss the simplicity," he said carefully. "Out there, problems have clear solutions. You either navigate safely or you don't. Unlike real life. Unlike real life." Maya looked between her parents, seeming to sense the subtext of their conversation. "I'm glad you're home more now, Dad. Even if it's just between trips." "Me too, kiddo." After dinner, while Silas loaded the dishwasher, Nadine and Maya sat in the living room looking through photo albums from Maya's childhood. He could hear them talking quietly, his daughter asking questions about family vacations and birthday parties, his ex-wife filling in details and sharing memories. It was, he realized, the first time in over a year that their house had felt like a home where a family lived, rather than a refuge where two survivors were hiding from the world. When Nadine left that evening, she hugged Maya goodbye and offered Silas a tentative handshake. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me come, for making this possible. Maya needed it. We all needed it, I think." After she was gone, Maya helped Silas finish cleaning up the kitchen. "That wasn't so bad," she said. "No, it wasn't. Think we could do it again sometime?" Silas dried his hands and hung up the dish towel, considering his daughter's question. A year ago, he would have said absolutely not. The idea of willingly spending time with Nadine, of pretending they could be some kind of family again, would have felt like betrayal of everything he'd fought for. But standing in his warm kitchen with his daughter beside him, he realized that healing wasn't the same thing as forgetting. Moving forward didn't require holding on to anger. And sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was choose grace over grudges. Yeah, he said. I think we probably could. On Christmas morning, Maya opened her presents with the enthusiasm of someone who'd learned not to take happiness for granted. She'd received a new basketball and some college prep books from Silas, clothes and jewelry from her mother, and gift cards from various relatives who weren't quite sure how to navigate the new family dynamics. But her favorite gift was the one that didn't come wrapped. The knowledge that her parents could be in the same room without recreating the bitter conflicts that had defined the previous year. This is the best Christmas I've had in a long time, she said as they sat by the tree, surrounded by wrapping paper and the comfortable debris of a holiday morning. Even without your mom here? Especially without her here. I mean, I love her and I'm glad we're getting along better, but this is us now. You and me. And that's pretty great. Silas pulled his daughter close and kissed the top of her head. Outside, snow was falling on Lake Superior, the flakes disappearing into the dark water like tiny acts of grace. His ship was tied up at the dock for the winter, waiting for the ice to break up and the shipping season to resume. In a few months, he'd return to sea and the cycle would begin again. But for now, he was exactly where he needed to be. Home, with his daughter, in the life they'd built together from the wreckage of what had come before. It wasn't the life he'd planned when he'd married Nadine 20 years ago. It wasn't the family he'd envisioned when Maya was born. But it was real and honest and earned through struggle, which made it more valuable than anything that had come easily. As the snow continued to fall and Maya dozed against his shoulder, Silas thought about the year ahead. There would be challenges. Maya's sophomore year of high school, college planning, the ongoing process of rebuilding trust with her mother. There would be long separations while he was at sea and difficult conversations about the future. But there would also be basketball games and family dinners and quiet evenings like this one. There would be Maya's graduation and college visits and all the milestones that marked a young person's journey toward independence. Most importantly, there would be the knowledge that they'd survived the worst storm of their lives and emerged stronger for it. That they'd chosen truth over comfortable lies, accountability over easy forgiveness, and healing over hatred. In the end, that was worth more than the marriage he'd lost or the innocence that had been destroyed. It was worth more than revenge or retribution, or any of the other satisfactions that had driven him through the darkest months of the previous year. It was worth everything.